Alright, hello citizens of the Nigelverse. It's Niger once again. Admittedly, I might have showed up with the wrong Marvel character for what we're doing today, but what can you do? It's time for the Amazing Spider-Man Retrospective. I just finished the Amazing Spider-Man Duology with my review of Amazing Spider-Man 2 I think it was Monday, either Monday or Tuesday. When I upload that, but either way, I finished it earlier this week. So if you haven't already, or technically last week, because Sunday starts a new week, but and nevertheless, that's pretty much essentially the duology is complete. Both Amazing Spider-Man movies. So if you haven't already, go check out those reviews. But today we're gonna be talking about what I think went right, what I think went wrong. As we normally do with these retrospectives, we talk about what do I think went right, what do I think went wrong. I talk about the best and worst, and I talk about where things could have been improved at. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. So, we're going to start with which of the two movies do I think was better. Now, admittedly, this was kind of harder than I thought. I think both movies have their good moments and their drawbacks, unfortunately. But I think overall, just by edging it out just a bit, I might have to go with the Amazing Spider-Man, the first one. That is something about it. I think I like just a smidge more than the Amazing Spider-Man 2. Like like I said, both movies I think are decent, but I think they do definitely have their drawbacks. It essentially boiled down to which do I think did the stuff that it did well, which do I think did it better, and then which one had less drawbacks. And I think Amazing Spider-Man, the first one that is, kind of falls into both of those categories where the drawbacks and what I did well, I think just edge it out slightly over the Amazing Spider-Man 2. Uh, so now we move into support characters. Who are my favorite and least favorite support characters? The reason I don't say like hero and stuff like with these like seeing the ones like just the Amazing Spider-Man duology or like the Spider-Man trilogy or like the Batman Dark Knight trilogy, mostly is because there's only really one hero for those, and that's Spider-Man, of course. But or so we mainly just look at the support characters now. How for like Star Wars or like the MCU, when I did those respectives talking about like my favorite least favorite heroes, that's mostly because there were multiple heroes. So I'll kind of just if you're wondering why I didn't necessarily do it that way. Instead, I talk about just favorite least favorite hero and heroes. That's essentially why. But nevertheless, that's my favorite and least favorite support characters. For my favorite, this one was kind of tough. Admittedly, this one was kind of tricky. Because I think the majority of the support characters were pretty solid, I'd say. But I think I probably have to go with Gwen Stacy. Like in terms of being a love interest, I think she's a lot better than Mary Jane. At least from the original trilogy. But her being supportive, her and her father, kind of like their dynamic, how it played into her relationship with Peter slash Spider Man, and then her death, like it hits hard. Like seeing them as a couple, you do kind of root for them, for the most part. And then when she does die, you do feel for Peter losing her, I should say. Yeah. So I think I'm gonna have to go with Gwen Stacy there. As for my least favorite support character, admittedly this one was kind of tricky as well. Mainly because even like the kind of lower tier support characters do play into the story. Like having everything be kind of interconnected. I think is nice. So as for my least favorite support character, I probably had to go with Mary Parker, only mainly by process of elimination. Like the only reason I didn't throw Richard Parker in there as well is because the Amazing Spider-Man 2 had him with like the video, which they did kind of have in the first movie, but then the second movie they had the video and the fact that his DNA was in the spiders that bit Peter. So Peter got injected essentially with his own DNA if you think about it, but But yeah, so but Mary Parker still played her role pretty well as Peter's mom, but otherwise, yeah. So I gotta so yeah, I had to put her there. I don't think she's a bad character. Just it's like I said, definitely process of elimination. And now for my favorite and least favorite villains. For my favorite villain, and I think this call me crazy. I went with Electro. Mainly because I think in terms of his backstory is pretty sad. You do root for the guy. Feeling invisible, feeling like nobody cared about him, nobody paying attention to him, and and then seeing how he then seeing that what happens to him, and you essentially you kind of resonate with him. You resonate with him a bit. It's not all the time where you resonate with the villains, but this one you kind of can. Like, you may not always resonate with his methods and everything, but you do kind of resonate with him and why he's upset and everything, why he feels like he's being ignored and everything, and how he's essentially lashing out because of it. But for the most part, and I think that's definitely what they were getting across, and I think that's what they were. I think that's what they got across essentially. Then my least favorite hit villain, and I had to go with the Rhino. Mainly because as he didn't really contribute much as opposed to like the other villains. Like, hey, honestly, this is kind of even unfair because he's not even really like a main villain. The main villains being like the Lizard, and Electro, and like the Green Goblin, and but he's not really a main villain, so it's unfair. But at the same time, he didn't really contribute much to the story because he was so little involved in it, and that Rhino mech suit was kind of lame. So I sadly had to go with the Rhino there. For overall characters, I'll tell you my least favorite right now. I also had to go with the Rhino for least favorite for the aforementioned reasons. And but then my favorite, you probably saw this coming. I gotta go with Spider-Man. I think the way Andrew Garfield portrayed Peter Parker slash Spider Man, and I think you do definitely root for him, and you can tell how like playing into that nature of Peter being very socially awkward, or being very much a nerd and everything, trying to juggle all his responsibilities, trying to find his balance in life. With him working at Oscorp and everything, playing a bit more into like the scientific side out of Peter Parker, which the other iterations of Spider-Man have as well. But especially with this one, with him like working in the lab and everything, I think playing into that hat, and of course having those legendary Peter Parker her slash Spider-Man quips as well. Like a lot of people pointed out, Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man and had some pretty funny quips and wisecracks and jokes as Spider-Man, and so yeah, and adding a bit more of that New York accent, I think, also helped as well. But so what do I think went right when it comes to the movies? The emotional moments, I think, showcasing the emotions, like when a moment comes up that you're supposed to feel whole sad for, or for the most part you end up feeling sad for, or where there's a moment where you're supposed to feel happy about it, you do for the most part feel happy about it. Like it's very obvious what they play into when they play into certain moments where there's certain moments where you're supposed to feel a certain emotion, which you may say, Nigel, isn't that kind of the whole idea? Yeah, but sadly, not all movies end up doing that. Like some of the moments where you're supposed to feel one emotion, you end up feeling another because the movie failed either failed to properly convey that emotion, or it didn't come out quite the way that they intended, and uh, I think the Amazing Spider-Man movies don't really have too many of those moments. They do have a few of those moments, but they're very few and far between. But otherwise, the emotion you're supposed to feel, usually you feel for Peter when he loses Gwen, when he loses Captain Stacy, and you can feel his guilt and everything, and you kind kind of resonate with his reasoning as to why he doesn't necessarily want to be with Gwen, because as she may end up dying, he made the promise to her father, and lo and behold, yeah. So those motivations, everything you do resonate with. I would say. The next one is the acting. The characters. There's even though, and we'll get to it. Even though the characters and more so the actors didn't always have the best to work with, you can tell they put their all into it. They definitely tried their best to make it work. And for the most part, I would say, hey, they definitely made it work. like you can definitely tell trying to put their all into their characters, whichever character they're supposed to play, whatever emotion they were supposed to convey, hey, they did for the most part. All right, then there's the effects, which and I put in parentheses for the most part because and we'll kind of get into it when we get into what I think went wrong, but the effects for the most part are pretty good, like pretty solid first time. Some of the effects do kind of have that flavor that they had in the original Spider-Man trilogy, like the Sam Raimi trilogy and everything, but with a bit more of but with a bit more of like an updated upper budget, if you will. And I know I am a little bit blurry, so I'll just turn my light on, and there we go. Kind of having some of those effects, but having kind of a bigger budget to be able to do more with them. So I think that does pay off for the movie in the long run, and a lot of the scenes, a lot of the visual effects and a lot of the way the scenes are crafted are also pretty cool. And Mark Webb, I think, did a pretty good job with that. Which I wonder if he was brought on just so they can make that pun with his name, and because Spider stuff like that, But and the last one I have is the villain motivations. You can definitely, with the exception of maybe a couple of the villains, you can kind of see where the villains are coming from for the most part. Dr. Connors, he just wanted to grow back his arm. He didn't expect to turn into a lizard, although if he's injecting himself with lizard DNA, what'd you expect? He just wanted to grow his arm back. Electro, Max Dillon, he wanted to be noticed. He was pretty much kicked around by the world until he essentially snapped and had the power to be able to fight back with his electricity. Harry Osborn was dying. He had the genetic disease and he was dying. So and wanted to cure himself, but went a little too far with it and yeah, so some of those villain motivations you do kind of resonate with. Like I said, you don't always resonate with the methods, but you do kind of resonate with the villains and their purposes, for the most part. Alright, so what do I think went wrong? For starters, some of the character designs did look pretty weird. All the villain designs, sadly, I think you can see what they were going for. They wanted to go for that sense of realism, which translating comic books and a lot of their cartoony nature into real life aspects. It can be hit or miss. It can kind of be a two-edged sword. Sometimes they're able to pull it off and sometimes they're able to translate it over. Sometimes some edits have to be made to make it look somewhat realistic, but also keep it within that kind of campy comic book nature for the most part. And I think the movie did try that at times, but it did kind of miss the mark. Lizard looked kind of weird. Electro did look kind of weird. The Goblin also looked kind of weird as well. Hell, and then of course there's the aforementioned Rhino suits. And then I mentioned with Spider-Man how, ironically, with the second movie, the costume was more comic accurate. But I also preferred the costume from the first movie more to that costume. And Spider-Man's costumes I don't think look bad necessarily, but I did kind of prefer the older one, on kind of putting its own spin on it, which is funny because as a kid I remember when I saw the Amazing Spider-Man, I saw the new costume, I didn't like it simply because it wasn't the comic version. Or more specifically, wasn't the Tobey Maguire version. Wait, what is this? No, this isn't Spider-Man's costume. What is all this? but you can definitely tell what they're going for there, hitting it more like a tracksuits kind of design and making it a bit more modern, I guess. And I'm mostly talking in regards to the Amazing Spider-Man 1 costume, but at the same time, I feel like it um, didn't necessarily didn't necessarily go as they intended, at least for me. Hey, the next thing that I documented is that it's a bit too dark and too gloomy sometimes. And I mentioned it multiple times before, and it bears repeating. Yes, Spider-Man's life is pretty tragic. Like Spider-Man, Peter Parker definitely has the Parker luck, and some pretty bad stuff, some pretty messed up stuff happens to Spider-Man, and and his life is kind of depressing, which I imagine, like, kind of my theory, my headcanon is that that's why he cracks so many jokes, is to take his mind off the pain and the sadness that he's feeling, which hey, humor can help with that, but I think the movie went a little too overboard with it, like, where it did feel kind of like a show, kind of like Arrow, or like any other, like the Dark show was kind of around this time. I'm kind of around that time. But I think Arrow's the main comparison with it. So it felt a little too. It felt almost like I think I saw this comparison as well. It felt almost kind of like Teen Wolf or something like that, where it's moody and dark and dramatic and stuff. Another one I kind of compare it to is like Twilight, because Twilight was a thing, and honestly, yeah, I think that might have been what they were going for. Which, I mean, it was popular at the time, but I feel like they went a little too overboard with it, and it didn't ruin too much of the fun factor, but it did make it. You're like, geez, man, lighten up a little. Although, you can't always tell that, because this Peter Parker went through some pretty tough stuff. So maybe it's kind of a moot point. Maybe you don't agree with me. That's totally fine. Which these are, for the most part, my opinion. So if you disagree with any of these, that's totally fine. But that's kind of just that's kind of what I'm kind of the vibes I'm getting from there. The next thing is that some of the characterizations, Peter is supposed to be very shy, very awkward, very socially awkward, which Pete, I'm kind of in the same boat sometimes. I'm not always the most social, unfortunately, but at the same time, it's a bit stalkerish at times. Like kind of carrying over or that aspect from the trilogy, because the original trilogy kind of had those aspects as well, and they kind of, like, they were fine at the time, but they did kind of age like milk. Like some of those carrying over or into here and I think it did kind of sour things just a little bit. Peter's just one example, but yeah, so some of the characterizations I wasn't really feeling. And then finally, some of the character relationships I feel like could have and should have been developed more. And the main example I give of that is the relationship between Peter Parker and Harry Osborn. They more so just told you that they were childhood friends, and then that was kind of the crux of Harry Osborn's involvement in the movie. But I wish it got explored a little bit more. Like, I wish they built it up a little bit more, or they had some scenes together, but then it mostly devolves into, mostly that's when it devolves into, hey, I need the blood, I need Spider-Man's blood, I need that to cure myself, and then things snowball from there. But I wish they delved a little bit deeper uh, into that relationship between them. And honestly, I feel like, hey, the way they probably could have did that is kind of one of my suggestions, is maybe have Harry in the first movie. Like, have Harry show up in the first movie. Pretty much, like the setup, I think, is fine. Like, them being childhood friends, and Harry comes back from boarding school to New York, where Peter is and everything, but have it build up in the first movie and then have their kind of friendship deteriorate. For example, compare it to the original trilogy, which that we'll definitely get to. Compare it to the original trilogy, Harry and Peter were friends pretty much the entire trilogy. They were friends slash enemies slash rivals the entire trilogy. We saw their friendship in the first movie. We saw how that kind of deteriorated with like Mary Jane, and then with Norman Osborn becoming the Green Goblin, and then Harry becoming the Green Goblin. Harry finding out Spider-Man was Peter Parker, or and vice versa, and then Harry blaming Spider-Man and for his father dying, and then finding out it's Peter, and then he gets mad at Peter, and then he tries to get his vengeance and stuff. So pretty much that continuation and building up that chemistry, that relationship between Peter Parker slash Spider-Man and Harry Osborn. Sadly, he the second movie couldn't be bothered to do that. But if you had it in the first movie and had it established and then build on from there, I think it would have worked out a lot better. And then I have a section for missed opportunities slash room for improvement. And like I just mentioned in my kind of spiel, showing a bit more, or establishing a bit more of like the relationships between characters, so that when and like the twists and stuff happens, and you get more of that payoff, because sadly it didn't quite get the payoff. And I mentioned earlier, like the emotions coming across not quite the way they intended. Like they got it right sometimes, but they didn't get it right sometimes. I think that's one of the examples of that, is because like Harry finding out Peter Spider-Man, and Harry dying and everything, and like it's supposed to hit a lot harder because as Harry feels betrayed by Peter, but because their relationship wasn't that established throughout the movie, or like Peter's decision to not give Harry his blood, like it's supposed to hit. It's supposed to. I think it was supposed to hit a lot harder, but sadly it didn't quite. So establishing more of those bonds, and this one is kind of unfair, or because, as I imagine, this probably would have been explored more in that Amazing Spider-Man 3 that we never got. But setting up the Sinister Six, when they were setting up the Sinister Six at the end of the Amazing Spider-Man 2, showing all like the gears and stuff, sadly, like I said, never really materialized. But I think the third movie would explain that, uh, while we're kind of on the subject, a couple things I'll mention. I'll mention Make Spider-Man 3 in a bit, and kind of talk about that. But another thing I do have to mention is, sadly, this movie, and you probably saw this coming, this movie did kind of suffer from being inside the shadow of the original trilogy. Hell, you saw me reference the trilogy a lot in this very video, but sadly, going from Tobey Maguire, such a really awesome Spider-Man, and the Sam Raimi trilogy being an awesome trilogy, to pretty much this new guy, and like who's this new guy? Andrew Garfield? What? This isn't Tobey Maguire. I feel like that did kind of harm the movie. In the long run, and sadly, it's not the movie's fault. But more so host circumstances, which is unfortunate. But also, I do have to mention, in the Amazing Spider-Man 3 we never got. So originally there was going to be plans for an Amazing Spider-Man 3, and I imagine that we would have explored the Sinister Six a bit more. But an agreement was made between Sony and Disney, if I'm not mistaken, and to bring Spider-Man over to the MCU, which is then what begat Tom Holland's Spider-Man within the MCU. So it is bittersweet, because on one hand, Tom Holland, I think, did a really solid job as Spider-Man, and the new Spider-Man is probably going to be the Spider-Man for a while until the next person replaces him, because that's just how it goes. But at the same time, what could have been? And so people have been begging for years for Amazing Spider-Man 3. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, and aka the Amazing Spider-Man, is the only one to have never gotten a third movie. There's been plenty of jokes and memes about it, but do I really think that it should get an Amazing Spider-Man 3? Should there be an Amazing Spider-Man 3? The thing is, I feel like it'd be kind of... Here's the thing, like, it'd be cool to have, and I kind of am gonna echo the sentiments I did when it came to the Spider-Man 4 that we never got. Man, what is it with Spider-Man and movies and not quite finishing their own stories? Is but hopefully Tom Holland Spider-Man gets a fourth movie. But the thing is it'd be kind of unnecessary because because we've essentially kind of moved on from it for the most part. Like we have a new Spider-Man. Some of the villains that they teased at, such as uh, within the Sinister Six scene that I mentioned, like the Vulture and everything, ended up appearing in Spider-Man canon anyway. Obviously, Vulture was in Spider-Man: Homecoming, so I feel like it'd be kind of unnecessary to have a Amazing Spider-Man 3. Would it be some nice closure? Sure, and Andrew Garfield has at least expressed interest in wanting to work within the MCU and everything. But while I do think it'd be kind of necessary, a part of me does kind of want to see it. Like I wouldn't hate if they did an Amazing Spider-Man 3. I just feel like it'd be kind of unnecessary, at least because of where we are in terms of like where Spider-Man is, where the Spider-Man movies and Spider-Man IP is and everything. But that's mostly just me. But nevertheless, that's going to do it for kind of this retrospective. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please do me a favor: like, comment, subscribe, share it with your friends, and turn on post notifications so you know every time I upload a video so you can see as soon as it drops. And let me know in the console your thoughts on this retrospective duology, and do you think that the Amazing Spider-Man movies should have been treated better? For me, I do like definitely I do recommend them for the most part. Or sadly, between some of the stuff I mentioned and then kind of being the shadow of the original trilogy, I feel like the Amazing Spider-Man movies did kind of get screwed over a little bit. Like there was so much potential, but sadly, not all of it was realized. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later. Peace.